Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, welcome back. Well, not welcome back. This is your first time, your first flip. Little guy's first flip. It's such a big deal. No, all right, anyway, so the big thing about it, though, is welcome to your very first flip of the very, very new year, right? I'm going to send a link out with this in an email as well, just so there's no confusion and stuff like that, because I know a lot of people are like, am I honors or AP or Western Civ? I don't know. So, calm down. It's going to be fine. All right, so now look. But the big thing about it, though, is this is where we left off in class, right? We did so much stuff in class today. It was so nice to meet all of you and to meet and interact with y'all and get to know some of your names and stuff like that. So I'm very, very excited also to meet my F period tomorrow. Very, very excited about that. I'll see you guys then. And the other big thing about it, though, in general, is we are going to start off by we're going to start off by, what am I trying to say? We're going to start off where we left off in class. There we go, right? So I know in C period, we were left off talking about this right here, right? We were breaking down the concept of Western civilizations after I told you that a lot of your history teachers had lied to you in the earlier parts of your life. We talked about AD, we talked about BC, we talked about common dating practices, we talked about how Ring Around the Rosie is not about the Black Death Plague, and a lot of other things like that, right? Well, we left off mostly talking about the concepts of Western civilizations and then the concept of civilizations, right? Because in so many other schools, they teach this class as world history. But in reality, are we really learning world history? Not really. We're really learning more about Western civilizations, right? And Western civilizations are going to be those places that originated out of the Mediterranean, and they include places like Europe, the Americas, and other areas that were impacted by those cultures, right? We are not talking very much about Eastern civilizations for a lot of reasons, mostly due to the fact that that is not an area of expertise of which I have, and we don't have time to actually be able to double down on both of them, right? And so it's much more along the lines of trying to actually help you understand why society exists the way it does in this Western civilization that we currently live in, right? But we talked about Western civilization, or Western, the concept of Western in class today. We talked about how it's not like a direction, it's a cultural idea. And all of your notes, we should probably do really quick, is jump back to Western and put some quotes around it. Because it's not literally like a thing, it's like an idea, right? An idea of a Western society. And then we also are now leaving off and talking about civilizations, right? Civilization refers to the concentration and sedentary societies formed after the end of the Paleolithic period. Now, a lot of you are like, whoa, pump the brakes, Mr. Terry. Back it up, back it up. I don't know what sedentary means, and I don't know what Paleolithic means, right? Now, the Paleolithic thing, we'll get into in a second. Sedentary, though, is a very important word that you need to go ahead and write down a definition to, or make sure that you understand what it is, right? I know in my C period I had Brianna, right? So Brianna, I need you to make sure that you write this down, okay? So really quickly, sedentary means people that don't move, right? It means creating a city or a town, and you're staying in one place. A civilization is really, really key on that component. The idea that people are now located in this one area and they don't leave, right? About really quickly, though, does that mean that people left at one point? Well, they did, and we'll get into that here in a second, right? But when we're talking about history in general in this course, where are we starting, right? Where are we starting? So the big thing about it is when we're talking about it, you have to understand that we're not talking about all of history. We're talking mainly about the history that has to do with the origin of human beings, right? We're going to start as early as human beings started, right? And you have to understand that you're going to see the growth of human beings, also known as Homo sapiens, are going to start popping up around 300,000 years ago in the continent of Africa, right? And we're talking about that here in a second. But really, in the grand scheme of things, you know what's absolutely crazy? That the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. I'm going to say that again. 4.5 billion years old. The rock that we're sitting on right now that you can't go off the end of, somebody said in class. All right, so the big thing about it is the big rock that's hurtling through space right now has been around for 4.5 billion years. And human beings have only been around for about 300,000 years of that 4.5 billion years. And so if you were looking at the expanse of the entirety of the history of the Earth as a football field, let's say hypothetically that this 100 yards was 4.5 billion years worth of the Earth's history, that it started here and that this is the current era, right? How much of this football field do you think is taken up by human beings being alive? Anybody? How much of it? Some of you are probably like, I don't know, maybe the 40-yard line. We've been here for a while. Listen to the numbers I'm saying. If this football field represents 4.5 billion years of the Earth's history, the only amount of space on this football field that would be taken up by human beings or Homo sapiens being alive and living on it is the last inch before the other end zone. Just this little tiny strip of the football field. That's how tiny we are in the grand scheme of the history of the entire planet. Actually, we believe more along the lines of like the last blade of grass is since the time that we've actually been making stuff since the Industrial Revolution, which is bananas. All right, so now look, but the origin of Homo sapiens is going to happen around 300,000 years ago. Well, actually, the origin of human beings is going to happen around about 300,000 years ago, right? And we believe that the very, very first human beings are going to pop up in the continent of Africa, right? And around this time period, at about 250,000, like BC, right? People are going to, or like hominids is what they were called at the time, Australopithecus is what the earliest form of it was called at the time, are going to begin to migrate out, right? Now, just so you know, there are tons of other versions of like humans and stuff like that. We have evolved from a simpler form of like human beings known as Australopithecus, is what we believe when they broke away from apes and they began to evolve into what human beings are now. Some of our earliest evidence of this is actually right here, and she actually has a name, and it's really, really, really cool, actually, and her name is Lucy, right? So this is one of the oldest pieces of evidence of human beings that we have in existence, right? And so when we're talking about Lucy, who is a very like firm form of what we call Australopithecus, is an early form of man, right? And we have some of her old remains and stuff like that, and these were actually found in Africa, right? And we then believe that over time, human beings began to evolve from this, right? And they kept pushing forward, and they kept getting larger brains, and then walking further upright, and doing things like that, and then making tools, and growing, and growing, and growing, until you get to the modern version of human beings that we have now, which is known as Homo sapiens. More specifically, Homo sapiens sapien, because mainly due to the fact that Homo sapien also includes like Homo sapien adultu, and then Neanderthal, and a couple of other ones as well. But we believe that that is going to happen around 300,000 years ago when hominids pop up. And then as they grew into Homo sapiens, they're going to begin to migrate out of Africa, right? So the thing you need to understand is that this migration out of Africa is going to lead to the settlement of these different areas of the world, right? And it's going to eventually even lead to people going into the Americas. That's how Native Americans ended up in the Americas, was then during this migration period of human beings across this old thing that y'all probably learned about when you were in elementary school, known as the Bering Strait, right? The Bering Strait was this big like frozen land bridge. So people literally began to migrate and settle all over these different areas. And when they settled, they were creating civilizations. But it took them a little while to get there, right? So Homo sapiens are going to pop up and start migrating out of Africa around several 100,000 years ago, right? When you're looking at human history, though, in totality, you have to understand that there are two time periods of human history that we need to talk about, right? And the two time periods of human history are known as, one, the Paleolithic period, right? So the very first one, that is the bulk of human history, is known as the Paleolithic period, right? And what Paleolithic means is all about that migration. It's all about that movement. It's all about those early human beings getting around and moving around and getting out of Africa and moving to other places and settling areas like Europe and Asia. And over time, their bodies would begin to evolve to certain environmental conditions, and melanin would leave their skin, and we would end up with the multitude of cultures that we have now during this Paleolithic period. And the Paleolithic period was also known as the Old Stone Age, right? So paleo, meaning old, and lithic, meaning Stone Age, right? Now, the Paleolithic person and Paleolithic societies were very, very key about one thing. They were nomadic hunter-gatherers, right? Now, let's talk about a couple of these words really, really quickly, okay? Nomadic means that they would move around constantly to find food and keep their societies alive, right? That means that they did not live in one place. They would move constantly, right? Old Stone Age people did not have a set home. They would actually migrate to follow food, or migrate to actually find new foods and gather them, right? And so hunter-gatherer societies is what you really think of a lot when you think of like the simpler, older types of human beings, right? When you think more about what some of you might actually say is cavemen, right? Like that's Paleolithic people, right? Caveman is a very, very goofy way to look at them, and it's not actually accurate, but we're not going to talk about that right now. So the big thing about it, though, is nomadic Paleolithic societies are also very important for a lot of different things. They had a gender division of labor, right? Early on, during these Paleolithic societies, men oftentimes were hunters, right? And they would go out in large hunting parties, and they would actually go out and hunt down certain animals and bring them back as a protein source to keep the community alive, right? As they were moving around and like actually have meats as a base of their diet, right? And then women, and oftentimes children who were not large enough to hunt at the time, would then be gatherers and make medicines and raise children, and then actually gather fruits, vegetables, berries, and other kind of vegetable matter that could be eaten, right? Now, here's the really, really key thing. Very, very important right here. is just noticing the equality between the two genders at the time, right? Men had a very specific job that kept their community alive, and women had a very specific job that kept the community alive. And if anybody dropped their end of the bargain, entire groups of people could die, right? Now, granted, Paleolithic people only lived in communities of about less than 50, less than 50 people. But they still had a very, very egalitarian setup. And during these Paleolithic communities, you're going to see the origin of language, right? You're going to see the origin of language because men are going to need to be able to communicate in these hunting groups, to be able to point at something and let them know, hey, look, the deer ran that way, right? And they are then going to eventually come up with words to actually describe certain things and stuff like that. So the earliest forms of language, we believe, actually came from hunting parties and actually trying to show or demonstrate as nonverbal signals and then assigning words to different items, right? So that is going to be to the origin of language. Simple, very, very ancient people are actually going to be the earliest forms of language, right? Now, early religions are also going to pop up as well. Now, this is very, very key. Next to early religions, do me a favor and write down the evidence that we believe showed us early religion. And the biggest thing is when they began to bury their dead, right? Paleolithic people, however primitive they were, and the fact that they didn't have metal tools and they were still using very simple formats of things and they were extremely nomadic and still moving around to find food, they are going to begin to practice early religion. Now, the early religion, though, is going to be most emblematic in their burial of the dead, right? So early Paleolithic people are going to start burying their dead, and that burying of the dead is going to show us that they're trying to keep that body safe from scavengers or from other things eating it or devouring it, right? And by that means that there may have been some understanding of death and maybe a possible belief in the afterlife. Because early Paleolithic people, as time goes on, anthropologists have discovered that some of these early Paleolithic graves have been buried with small items and trinkets and things. And now, granted, we're talking about people that were alive in 100,000 BC, right? We talked a lot about today, BC, AD. These are extremely ancient people, these Paleolithic people. You're also going to see the growth of early forms of art as well and different intellectual activity. This, for example, was discovered in a cave in the south of France, and it's one of the earliest and most detailed cave drawings demonstrating the movement of animals and things like that. This is a Paleolithic person who doesn't have a written language and may very well not have a complex society, but is drawing and trying to portray different ideas, right? So Paleolithic people are the oldest versions of humans that we've ever seen. But then all of a sudden, something's going to happen, right? What the heck happened here, right? What happened that drove people from being Paleolithic, nomadic hunter-gatherers to then becoming this red end of the line that, as we can see also when we're looking at this line, this little chunk of time is way smaller than this giant period, right? Human history is mostly Paleolithic, right? The Neolithic period is only a few thousand years old, right? Because it's going to pop up around 10,000 BC. But what's going to happen that leads to this change? It's the invention of farming, right? That's a big deal. You need to highlight this, circle it, star it, make it look like it's exploding, and it's going to happen right around 8,000 BC, 10,000 BC, give or take. We're not positive, right? But around that point, it's going to be the Neolithic agricultural revolution, right? So we're going to stop being the old Stone Age, and we're going to become the Neolithic period, right? So all this red right here is known as the Neolithic period, right? Neolithic means new Stone Age or new civilizations of man, right? Or the new ideas going forward. And the agricultural revolution relates to that invention of farming, right? Now, some of you are like, why is farming such a big deal? We do it in my backyard. Calm down, all right? So when you're thinking about people going from being nomadic and primitive and stuff like that to now inventing farming, that's a really, really big deal because now they can become what we talked about earlier, sedentary, right? They can start staying in one place and not moving around as much, right? Farming is a massively huge deal because now human beings are cultivating their own crops, domesticating their own animals, doing all these different things, and it's going to lead to massive positive outcomes, right? You're going to see the domestication of plants and animals, which is a big, big deal. Some of you are like, plant domestication, I can train my plants, sort of, and we'll talk about that a lot in our next class period. We'll talk about how you domesticate a plant, right? And then also surpluses. That's huge, right? Highlight it, star it, underline it. Surpluses is when they actually started farming in the Neolithic period. Enough goods to stay alive through the harsher seasons, through winters and things like that, right? Villages and concentration is going to be a big deal as well, because now with farming, you can have people that live together in one area as a unit, and they can all keep each other alive. But the big thing about it is look at this picture right here. This is a piece of ancient Egyptian papyrus that demonstrates one man farming with several animals and a large amount of goods he's farming. Now, the big thing about it is, though, is you don't need everybody to farm. So that means if, like, wait a minute, if we got one person farming and they're making enough for everybody, then what is everybody else going to do? That's going to lead to specialized jobs, right? That means everyone who's not farming can now focus on being a potter, making things, weaving things, making like clothing or tools or items like that. And that's going to lead to the development of technology in human beings, right? In 8000 BC, thousands of years before Christ was ever born, right? And that's going to lead to the growth. That means if we have specialized jobs and we're making specialized products and we're now also farming the extensive amount, wait a minute, there's another village or a town. There's another place down like miles away from us and they have things we don't have. So that's going to lead to trading different goods, right? So you're seeing the growth of civilizations in this earliest change of time period, all with the invention of one thing, just farming. Just inventing farming was like this big of a deal, right? You're also going to see the growth of writing, which you can also see in this like text, because this is the written form of language used to describe what's going on in the image, right? And then you're also going to see the growth of art. All of these things coming from just the invention of farming. And that's why it went from Paleolithic or Old Stone Age to Neolithic or New Stone Age. Why we went from being nomadic to being sedentary, right? So the big thing about it, though, is that there are positive outcomes. You need to understand that there are also massively negative outcomes, right? Nobody likes the negative things, but there are going to be bad things that happen from the invention of farming, right? And the big ones include social differentiation, which is going to be like social classes. You know what I mean? Like social classes are kind of a grimy thing because it's like, I am here and you are there. That's a bad thing. That's going to actually evolve out of the invention of farming because remember, like I said, in early Paleolithic periods, everybody was equal because everybody had to keep each other alive, and it was a very harsh way to try and stay alive. But because of the invention of farming, that guy farms more than I do, and he has more things than I do, and if he has more things than me, that means he's wealthier than I am, right? So the thing you need to understand is you're going to see the split of social classes and stuff like that. Economic inequality is going to be a big thing. You're going to see people who are very, very wealthy versus people who are very, very poor, right? Disease is a big one as well. Viruses are going to start jumping off of animals that are not meant to live in giant flocks together, and they're going to start transferring themselves into human beings, right? And killing people and stuff like that. For example, smallpox is, we believe, going to be a thing that comes from like some ancient rodents and stuff like that who began hanging around human beings in collective matters to eat all the things that we were farming, right? Other big things include influenza. We believe the flu came from like herds of pigs that might have actually been a thing that then the like actual virus like lived inside those pigs, became a big breeding ground for the virus, and then the virus jumped onto us, and that's how we ended up getting it, right? So then also poor nutrition as well. It's going to be a lot harder to keep yourself healthy when you're only eating carbs and bread all the time, right? Because in Paleolithic hunter-gatherer communities, you had a lot of vegetable matter, a lot of protein, and very limited amounts of carbohydrates, right? Like, so like, not saying carbs are bad for you. My wife would punch me in the face. Carbs are great for you, but I'm just saying in general, people began to depend on them, right? Bread became the main idea or like thing, subsistence of good or food of society. And the other big thing is women are going to lose a heavy amount of rights, right? Because remember, in the Paleolithic era, gatherers had a massively important job, right? Hunter-gatherer societies, typically women would actually be the gatherers. Now, if you're not needed to gather anymore because people are farming now, and if the farmers are all men, what are you doing now, right? And women are going to get kind of a pushed back role in society, right? So that's a really important thing to understand. And when you're looking at the progression of civilization, though, the invention of farming is going to be so important that it's going to lead to the growth of villages, small groups of people living together. That's going to lead to the growth of towns with specialized jobs and people making things and trading them with other communities, which is going to lead to cities, which is then going to lead to civilizations, right? Massive groups of sedentary people staying together in the thousands, right? So your villages are going to be like under 100. This is like 100 to 500. This is like 500 to like the higher 800s. This is going to end up being in your thousands of people, right? So the dawn of civilizations is going to pop up kind of around 3000 to 4000 BC, right? So about 4,000 years after the invention of farming, you're going to see the growth of civilizations. And the characteristics of a civilization is very important, right? Concentration, like people living together in large groups. Complex religious systems. Political and military structures. Social classes. Writing. Art and intellectual activity, which is a big deal. Artisans are basically people that specialize in a job and made very, very certain things at a very, very high quality, right? For example, a blacksmith would be considered an artisan, or a person who made pots, or like potters and things like that. Architects, stonemasons were a big artisan thing as well. But let's break these things down. Concentration is people living in groups together. Complex religions is you're going to see the growth of religious ideas from these civilizations so they can try to answer things because they didn't have science at the time, right? For these primitive, but these Neolithic civilizations are going to use religion to answer questions that they can't understand. Why did we have a terrible harvest this year? Oh, because the gods are mad at us, right? So complex religion is going to come out and fill the void that science didn't have in these eras, right? Political and military structure is going to be very big, which we'll talk about a lot later on, but you're going to have leaders and a hierarchy and also militaries to keep your civilization safe from other civilizations that might be coming to steal your stuff, right? Social class is going to be big. Writing, as you can tell, is going to be massively important because only civilizations that have massive writing are going to progress throughout time, right? Art and intellectual activity is the very last big one, right? Now, you learned about a lot of these different civilizations, these early civilizations, probably when you were in 6th, 7th, 5th grade, right? Can you name any of them off the top of your head? Good job, Dublin. I heard what you said over there. She said Mesopotamia, right? And then somebody, I think it was one of the Briannas, said Egypt. And then somebody else said the Hebrews, right? I think it was Emma over there that said the Hebrews. Yeah, not really. So the big thing about it, though, is you're going to see a lot of these ancient civilizations. The ones you learned about when you were younger. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Assyria, Persians. And we'll talk about a bunch of them randomly throughout this time period. But they're the earliest ones that are going to start off by checking off all of those boxes right there and having all these things, Mesopotamia being the oldest one, right? But who's the first Western civilization? Who's the very, very first one that we refer to as the beginning of Western societies? That first one that popped up out of the Mediterranean and became a whole thing. Well, the very, very first ones are who we're going to start talking about in class when I see y'all again. And it's the ancient Greeks, right? So the ancient Greeks are where we're going to begin our content for this course, and we're going to start off by talking about a lot of different things, how we track their society, and all that different stuff, but I'll see y'all then. Be ready for your warm-up. If you need to go back and rewatch this a little bit, I understand, but I hope y'all enjoyed your first flip. Y'all have a good one.